In a bombshell report in IGN, the headline read that Disney tried to tamp down anything that could be perceived as gay in Inside Out 2. Underneath the headline is that Pete Docter, the current head of Pixar Animation, is now a bottleneck within the company. There are also reports of staff being overworked for weeks on end and then being fired right before they would be eligible for bonuses on the largest grossing animated film of all time. Let's talk about that on That Park Place. All right, so we've been waiting for this entire show to bring up this story. Inside Out 2 was the hit Pixar needed, but the laid-off employees who crunched on it are still hurting. 10 former Pixar employees talk about the pains of this year's layoffs, the pressure that surrounded Inside Out 2, and the larger cultural concerns at the studio. This from September 17th. 2 days ago seems so long ago. This has been updated. That's why. This is an amazing level of reporting that I'm usually not accustomed to from IGN. Starting with the basic fact here, Inside Out 2 is Pixar's highest grossing film. Of course it is, because it's also the highest grossing animated film of all time, with a jaw-dropping $1.6 billion at the worldwide box office. It's a stunning turn of events when considering the studio's aforementioned recent struggles. And who doesn't love a redemption story, especially when a brand as beloved and nostalgic as Pixar is involved? This story, by the way, from Alex Stedman. There's an incredible amount of people who are like, I can't do this anymore. I think for a month or two, the animators were working 7 days a week. One source, presumably from Pixar, says ridiculous amounts of production workers, just people being tossed into jobs they had never really done before. It was horrendous. IGN spoke to 10 former Pixar employees for this story under the condition of anonymity. They go into detail about the pains of the layoffs, the financial struggles of those layoffs have left them with, and the details behind what one source calls the largest crunch in the studio's history. It's a claim disputed by a senior executive at Pixar who tells IGN that the crunch at the end of Inside Out 2 was no different from those on many other films from the studio. But the fact remains, there are many who feel like they rushed to give Pixar the hit it so desperately needed and were hung out to dry. I would venture that at least 95% of the people that got laid off are financially ruined right now, one person says. So, Culture, can you talk about the recent history before Inside Out 2 at Pixar?
Well, I mean, outside of the flops, you mean? With the terrible performance of, I think, Lightyear was the thing that kicked it off, as I believe it says in this article. But they were going downhill rather quickly, inserting agenda here and there. They've also not been reaching their core audience, and it's reflected in the earnings at the box office. A lot of these things, it's so coincidentally timed with a lot of the revelations of the Reimagine Tomorrow program and other things like that within Disney. I mean, outside of the fact that the financial situation was, a complete disaster, they really needed to get away from the things that they thought were causing the problem. Here in this article, I think they speak specifically of the gay kiss that was in the Lightyear film, but it's been so much more than that. It's a company-wide situation. But Pixar itself had such a string of failure that there was a point at which, as has already been suggested during this part of the conversation, that they were considering combining both Disney Animation and Pixar together.
This especially following John Lasseter, who made his exit, 2017, 2018,
yeah.
The Me Too movement, as it was so popularized there. And then in 2020, right on the release of Onward, interestingly enough, obviously theatrical shuts down due to the pandemic and related fallout from that. So they stuck all of the theatrical slate from Pixar on Disney Plus exclusively, which was a really upending of the traditional model that Pixar had been operating under. And now coming out of that, their first big release foray into theatrical was, like you said, Culture, Lightyear. And apparently the leadership there has a lot of opinions about what might have sunk Lightyear's chances at the box office. And apparently that heavily impacted Inside Out 2, and this level of crunch that we are hearing about right now, well, that might have coincided with some story changes that might have taken place late in the game surrounding this specific film. And now, possibly, they want to repeat this crunch cycle with their next film that should have already been released. Very interesting.
It also sounds familiar because of what happened with Wish. Of course, that's over at Disney Animation side, but it's the same thing. And Look, Onward already had some controversial stuff in it. Not that I thought it was a big deal at the time, but at that point, Disney had not yet revealed just how much emphasis they were going to place on certain agendas. And, it did suffer from the fact that obviously we were having a shutdown, but at the same time, it was kind of a lackluster film to begin with. That was one of the very first films I actually reviewed on YouTube going way back to that time period. So I remember it quite distinctly, and it was very unimpressive. And I think that I've noticed that consistently with both Disney Animation and with Pixar, that there's been a huge loss of focus that coincides with the Disney files, which, Alan was just talking about. And, the performance has suffered for everybody. I think everybody just needs to realize that. Again, that put Inside Out 2 in the spotlight. This was a Hail Mary, I believe, to save Pixar as a studio.
Right. So let's point out the 7 films that they have released since Toy Story 4. Incredibles 2, Coco, and Toy Story 4, debatable how much Lasseter had involvement from there. But from onward, or onward forward, if we want to be funny with it, we've got Onward, which was a pandemic theatrical and almost straight to Disney Plus release. We have Soul, which was pretty much only Disney Plus, eventually got a physical media release. Luca, then Turning Red, same thing, and Lightyear, which was their return to the box office. Elemental did go to the box office and eventually made $500 million. I'm not going to do the control F on this, but in this article, they basically reveal, and I totally agree with this. This is in line with what Valiant has talked about for so long, that 600 million is the minimum threshold for Pixar to consider one of these films profitable. So they have not had a profitable film since Toy Story 4. And Toy Story 4 was a big hit for the company, despite the fact that maybe it didn't deserve it from a story standpoint. Elemental, Inside Out 2. So before Inside Out 2, and I have to wonder if some of maybe our reaction here and on the WDW Pro channel from some others, it sounds like they went through this film and tried to make sure that there wasn't anything objectionable. And what's more than that, it sounded like they didn't want anything to be perceived as objectionable in these films here. I watched Inside Out 2. I was in a rush while I watched it, so I'm going to leave my general review out of it, although I don't think it was as good as the first. I'll say that. Did anybody here watch Inside Out 2, and you want to offer any thoughts on that one compared to the rest of that slate, those 7 films?
Well, I did watch Inside Out 2. I watched Inside Out 2 with Camera Girl, who was a fan of Inside Out 1. And I believe one of the comments that I made, and I probably did on that Park Place, was that given how the trailer set up what Inside Out 2 was going to be, and we thought that there was going to be this lesbian attraction between Riley and, Riley, and I'm forgetting the girl's name, but she's like the Val. Thank you. She's the captain of the high school hockey team. It made it look like there was going to be this lesbian storyline in there that didn't need to be there. And I was very wary about it. Again, my sister's like, I want to take your niece to this movie, but I don't know, given about, what's going on with the trailer. So I said, I'll go and I'll see it first. So after I saw it, I'm like, it's nothing like what was in the trailer. Riley was just Val was like an idol to her. She was like, she's captain of, high school hockey team. I really, really want her to like me. That's very relatable and understandable. But what I'm thinking is, what kind of come to Jesus meeting happened? Because what we saw in the trailer was definitely not what we got in the film. What we got in the film was something that everyone could relate to, regardless of your stage in life. Especially one of my favorites, Nostalgia, the old lady who comes out and they're like, no, we're not ready for you yet. That was funny, but it's very obvious they course corrected on this, because they could not, all of the films that they had from Pixar that were failing, this was their last one. And again, they had to come to Jesus meeting about this.
Oh yeah.
And it seems like it's pretty obvious some of the animators weren't too happy about having this happen. But at the end of the day, guess who's paying your salary?
Right, and we'll go back to the article here for the quote. The apparent hesitance to touch on LGBT themes, storylines in particular, affected Inside Out 2's development, according to several of our sources. Multiple people recall hearing about continuous notes to make Riley, the main character of both Inside Out movies, come across as less gay, leading to numerous edits that ramped up around September of 2023 after the resolution of the WGA strike. Sources describe rumors that there was special care put into making the relationship between Riley and Val, a supporting character introduced in Inside Out 2, seem as platonic as possible, even requiring edits to lighting and tone of certain scenes to remove any trace of romantic chemistry. One source describes it as just doing a lot of extra work to make sure that no one would potentially see them as not straight. Why is this, if we want to talk about the current online culture of grown people here, why is this necessary if you want to avoid this for a film, if you want to control the discourse around your children's animated film?
Well, I think adults, parents specifically, when they are going to select one of these films, Disney now has a reputation where all of us have been asked the question, is this safe to take my kid to? Yeah. Right? They're asking that question about a Pixar film because they want to preserve their child's innocence and avoid difficult conversations until much later in life when it's appropriate. And for many adults and parents, that needs to be more towards your teenage years when these issues will arise naturally. So it's one of those things that's also one of the reasons why they're primarily frustrated with schools right now, trying to push this stuff in there as well. So parents have enough to do battle with than to be doing battle at their own school and in entertainment. I mean, I'm sure they're going to focus more on entertainment and then just their school, and just avoid the entertainment entirely because it's just easier. And that was the thing. Disney could not afford for this to happen on this film. And it's one of the reasons why it earned the $1.6 billion we keep, talking about. Because otherwise, I think this film was dead. I'm sorry, Vash, but this film was dead in the water. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I think you're exactly right, because a lot of people will point to Lightyear and say, well, there was this problem, there was that problem, there was the other thing, and that's all true, but I don't think Inside Out 2 makes $1.6 billion if it has those themes in it, because you're just going to get a segment of the audience who's like, you know what, no thank you. And that disparity that you talked about, Lorena, regarding the marketing for this film and what was actually in this film, well, I think was very apparent with the calls that we received from all sorts of people in the lead up to this film. I mean, Jonas, I believe you had a review from somebody on That Park Place talking about how she had fielded calls from all over the place from people asking whether or not this film was safe. Right. And that was, I think, the first question that you asked.
Right, and that is they stopped asking for some people. There was an early adopter trend here of people wanting to know whether or not Disney films were safe, and that is probably why the second video on the Everything Woke channel, the second upload, I think was no, maybe it was the first. Yeah, it was the second. Was Proud Family, Louder and Prouder, ended up getting something like 30,000 views on a brand new channel. And again, those are figures that I don't want to say they're big in the YouTube space, but everybody was wanting to know what in the world is going on at Disney here. That question has gone down a little bit, I think, as people are understanding that this company is predisposed to this kind of stuff. Bob Iger's comments about quieting the noise, whether or not it was true, that's something that was supposed to move the needle on public perception of Disney. They're not clearing all of this up here, and we have another story we could talk about here about whether or not Disney events are marketed to kids anymore. But Disney Plus at this point is essentially their big shows, their $200 million shows, are all supposed to be marketed to grown-ups. And even though the Disney brand is supposed to be for kids, and if you look at the viewership on Disney Plus, it sounds like 30 to 60% of the actual viewership on Disney Plus, which is not very high. I'm throwing that in here, is children and babysitter content, for lack of a better way of putting it. And then the other 30% is maybe these $200 million originals that they have gone between 6 and 7 of those a year, over more than $1 billion, in trying to get people to watch content for adults, being careful not to the order of those words there, because Disney hasn't got that far yet, content for adults that is on Disney Plus. So I think Disney has a severe brand issue going on right now. And Pixar was the first of the Disney studios to say, we're going to be talking about these mature themes here. When they did the Pixar Shorts series, this was one of their first times cursing in an animated short. The show, was it Pearl, about the ball of yarn. This was under Lasseter, so it's not a Jennifer Lee or Pete Docter thing here. They added cursing in a short that was all about women being accepted in the workplace. So they've always been the one that has, again, that identity issue of, are you a kids studio that happens to appeal to adults, or are you pushing the boundaries here? That whole idea of the Disney adult, and maybe that's a code for infantilized adult. Are those your audience at this point? Well, everyone waking up to that fact, or maybe the animators in the studio didn't realize that, no, in the end, we need to make a film that is universally appealing, as in something that a child would be entertained by through the entire film. And then if adult sits down to watch it with you, they're not going, what in the world is this? Forgive me, I've spoken for too long. This is an issue that I think Disney has throughout the entire company, of whether they need to decide right now if they're a kids company.
I was just about to say, I think that you've seen a shift from everything from movies to TV to the theme parks, to move away from families to, what's affectionately called by some dinks, DINK, dual income, no kids. You're reaching out to those adult couples without kids, and I mean, just look at the theme parks. They're not marketed to kids anymore. They're marketed to, people wearing rainbow flags, that don't have kids and are coming in there to spend a couple $1,000s.
You have specific Pride merchandise sold all basically year round now. You have Pride nights at the theme parks, at least at Disneyland and Anaheim. And it's interesting when you chart the course of maybe those who have actually woken up to this idea and the people who maybe necessarily haven't. In the paragraph right before you showed, Jonas, now Docter largely uses the language. Please go ahead.
Go ahead with your point.
Now Docter largely uses the language of making universal stories, which to him means something that's very homogenous that anyone can relate to. And look, I mean, look at the original Star Wars, for example, and when that film was released, a film that anybody could relate to, utilizing stories and themes that people could have find resonance in, no matter the culture, the language spoken, or whatever. At that crucial time period in the 1970s, was monumental. And well, perhaps they may have discovered that whole recipe for success with Inside Out 2.
Yeah, I want to point this out as far as the Pete Docter thing. And this I think can speak to the Jared Bush issue as well, because and people are reminding us that have come in late here. Yes, we're talking about the Jennifer Lee demotion here as well. Pete Docter right here. While Docter is publicly an executive producer of Inside Out 2, multiple sources say that he stepped in as uncredited co-director on the film, working heavily alongside director Kelsey Mann. In some ways, that move made sense to many. Docter, after all, co-wrote and directed the first Inside Out 2, and he was involved in others. I mean, you saw the end result of that. Inside Out 2 made $1 billion at the box office. One person says of Docter taking a larger role, that was a direct result of Pete's involvement. Pete's a genius. Nobody can dispute this. In fact, many of the sources IGN spoke to generally don't have particular negative feelings towards Docter. It's well known that after all these years and having a proven track record, he knows what he's doing, but also indicative of what some sources say is godlike worship of a man in charge, a holdover from the ousted chief creative officer, John Lasseter. One source says the studio leans on Docter to an unhealthy degree, and it's partially what leads to a situation like the crunch on Inside Out 2. You cannot do anything without Pete, literally nothing, one former employee says, and that creates a bottleneck. Now, I want to throw this out to everyone here. If you were to try to enact cultural change at Walt Disney, and you have only 4 studio heads when it comes down to it for 4 different brands. We're going to forget about National Geographic on here. If you have one person as the quote unquote creative bottleneck, this allows you to dictate whether or not the gay stuff gets in.
Yes.
For lack of a better way of putting it.
True.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually the way to go about it, to be fair. That's called leadership. The reason that you put these people in the charges is in these positions is to have a bottleneck. The buck stops with them. It's why everything worked so well when Lasseter was around. It's why Disney Imagineering was so much better when Lasseter was around. It's why, I mean, creatively, that man was the creative bottleneck for Disney for a period of time, which also included Disney Animation. The guy literally was the bottleneck for, or gatekeeper, that's probably the better way to say it, that we absolutely need. Right? Somebody was a gatekeeper on the Inside Out 2 film, which means that, you know, all the Zoomers were super happy when they went to see it because it allowed them to reach back into their own nostalgia, right? It allowed them to reach back into those touchstones that Vash was just talking about in their life as they were going through their a coming of age period of time, which is basically what Inside Out 2 was, in my opinion, was that coming of age, the realization, the dealing with a sense of self, become that sense of discovery, you know. And again, you ended up with Zoomers ugly crying in the back of the car while, you know, one of their friends was driving home. So this is the kind of, these are the kinds of films that you need to make. And as Vash said, they may have found that formula again. But to me, if you don't have somebody that's in charge, the buck stops here. You will never have a person to even point to that is responsible for why things are good or bad. You need that gatekeeper. You need the one single point, the one single viewpoint that is guiding you forward. That's what leadership is. It's not film by committee. You need to get rid of the committee. That's what you do.
I think you're correct. Anybody else want to add anything here on this issue? Because there's one more thing we have to hit on this Pixar story before we wrap it up.
They talk about the experimental nature of Pixar between that period, between John Lasseter's ouster and today, and how they're moving away from that, right? And I think culture is exactly right here. They are, look, these are supposed to be 4-quadrant films. They are budgeted to be 4-quadrant films, and you better have a story that appeals to at least some point of the masses, because these very personal stories that are referenced here in this article, I mean, it's just, those are fine for a much smaller production company, but this is Pixar, and it has a overarching staff in which it has to support, and budgets that have to be supported. It's just not going to work if you don't speak to a larger audience.
Yeah, I'm going to point this out as the button on all of this, and this is the moment where, even if you're course correcting, I don't like this very much. Layoffs of 14% of Pixar's workforce began in late May after much of the work of Inside Out 2 was complete. Though expected, the news was a blow for many employees, at least in part because they would not receive a bonus for Inside Out 2's eventual success. To qualify for the bonus, an employee would have to have worked on a project for a certain amount of time, which, as noted, was most of Pixar at the time, and be employed at the time when the bonuses were distributed. To be told by HR reps that we were not going to qualify for that bonus felt like an ultimate betrayal from Disney, to translate it here. Now, I'm going to say that Knee Pain made some excellent comments on this over on his channel about how this is not necessarily outside of industry practice, and it could be that they got 10 rookie employees, junior employees, to comment here that just didn't know that it's that's what it was like here. But it doesn't mean that it's not a dirty move. So
no, it's a common move that's been done in corporate America. And I've seen that happen, where there's been this big, huge project that they're throwing everything at. People are working overtime, all of that. And then they decide, okay, well, we don't need so many people. They roll them off and say, oh yeah, you're not gonna participate in the bonus because we're cutting you. It sucks. It's a dirty move, but that is corporate America. When it comes down to it, you are literally just a number.
Yep.
And it's very demoralizing when, they talk about how they value their employees and, yeah, keep it up. This is great. And you're hitting all the KPIs and everything. And it's just like, okay, yeah, we're done with you now. No, I'm not going to give you anything.
I'm putting this up on screen because Pinochet's helicopter tours makes a good point. Take it up with your union or negotiate a better contract.
That is very true.
I agree with this, but I'm going to point out Emeryville is outside of the animation guild. So this is, and I'm not saying that they're wrong here at Pixar. I'm pointing out that Disney is flirting dangerously by bringing in a lot of rookie talent and then making them angry. I think there's a union story from Disney Springs we're not going to be able to get to today either.
I've heard, Jonas, that at Disney Animation and Pixar, they're having some fantastic pizza parties.
That's right, Hungry Howie's for everybody.
Thanks for watching That Park Plays News. For more information, consider checking out www.thatparkplace.com. And don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and send this out on your favorite social media accounts.